Islamist extremism is delivering a horrible toll of death and destruction in the Middle East at the moment, thanks to Hamas and Hezbollah and other groups funded by Iran. But it's also fomenting hate and division here in Australia and posing an ongoing terrorism threat too. So why are our governments and authorities not standing up against public advocacy for this sort of extremism? The inexplicable inaction in combating extremism in this country is deeply troubling. We've seen horrific and hateful acts in this country, the celebration of the slaughter of Jews, support for Islamist terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and yesterday, the lauding of Yahya Sinwar. This is the Hamas terrorist leader behind the October the 7th atrocities, who was finally killed in Gaza last week, but sickeningly was celebrated as a freedom fighter in Sydney yesterday.
He died a warrior's death amongst his men, one with his people in defence of his land, of the innocent Palestinian children slaughtered against a genocidal invader and occupier and colonizer.
When you've seen footage of families slaughtered in Israel on October the 7th, when you've seen footage of young girls running for their lives from the Nova Musical Festival on that day and then shot at point-blank range by Hamas terrorists and others who invaded from Gaza, when you've seen the evidence of the carnage, the evil, the deliberate slaughter of innocents on a day when more than 1,200 people were killed and 250 were taken hostage, including children as young as 9 months old, taken hostage. Well, when you've got any knowledge of any of this and you hold any trace of humanity in your soul, I don't know how you could do or say anything to support Hamas or the other terror groups, much less the despicable Hamas leader, Sinwar. Now gone, thankfully. But just to get a clearer understanding of his evil intent, you only have to look at this footage of Sinwar moving his family to safety in the Hamas tunnels below Gaza before the October the 7th atrocities, before them. That means, of course, that this was long before any Israeli military response. What this makes plain for those who have refused to see this reality previously, it makes plain that Sinwar knew there would be war. He knew the atrocities he was about to unleash on civilians in Israel would result in carnage for his own people in Gaza. He deliberately ensured that, along with his terrorist foot soldiers, thousands of innocent Palestinians would be traumatised and injured and killed in the ensuing war. Sinwar deliberately started a war, deliberately provoked death and destruction on his own people in order to advance his Islamist extremist agenda. It's all about creating Palestinian victims to inflame hatred against Israel in the Arab world, in the broader Muslim world, and across the international community. Sinwar hid underground with his family, knowing the people he claims to lead would be suffering above ground. It was as evil and as cynical as that. And so many useful idiots support it, even in this country.
In his death, he became a legend to be told for centuries, for his story will live on to inspire resistance all around the world.
If ever we needed evidence that our governments and law enforcement authorities are letting us down, there it was yesterday. This hateful extremism was preached and our law enforcement authorities and governments did nothing. It's more than a year now since we heard this at the Opera House. And it's more than a year since we heard this in a Sydney suburb.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory.
Yeah, there's been all that, and there's been protests and intimidation. We've seen Hamas and Hezbollah flags waved. We've seen threats and graffiti and vilification. And we've seen the Muslim fundamentalist organisation Hizb ut-Tahrir involved in many protests, even though it's banned in the UK as a terrorist organisation and banned also in many Muslim nations. But we've seen nothing but inaction from our own government. They just let this happen. No arrests or charges means no deterrent. No deterrent means it gets worse. And when it gets worse, our social cohesion is fractured, and we face the prospect that extremism could deliver even more violence than we've seen over the past 2 decades in this country. While all this unfolds, about the only thing our national government has done is raise the terror alert to probable. This inaction is recklessly dangerous.